Fox News alert. We are awaiting the first court appearance of the suspected gunman in Saturday's massacre at a Pittsburgh synagogue that left 11 people dead. An attack that police say was fueled by anti-Semitic rage. The feds are reportedly pursuing the death penalty against the suspect, 46-year-old Robert Bowers from the Pittsburgh area. Bowers has just arrived at federal court. This is Outnumbered, and I'm Melissa Francis. Here today is Harris Faulkner, host of Kennedy on the Fox Business Network. Kennedy, commentator and Fox News contributor Rachel Campos Duffy, and joining us on the couch today, Josh Holmes, Republican strategist and former chief of staff to Senator Mitch McConnell, and he is outnumbered. It is a tough day to be here, but we really appreciate you coming in to help us sort through some of these issues.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
All right, let's get to it. So we are getting new details on the victims killed inside the Tree of Life synagogue, among them a grandfather, a husband and wife, and two brothers. Authorities detailing the gunman's chilling words as he unleashed terror inside that house of worship.
During the course of his deadly assault on the people of the synagogue, Bowers made statements regarding genocide and his desire to kill Jewish people. After a standoff with police, Bowers eventually surrendered and remains in federal custody today. So our complaint charges Bowers with 29 separate federal crimes. There are 11 counts of murdering victims who are exercising their religious beliefs.
David Lee Miller is live in Pittsburgh with the latest. David Lee.
Melissa, authorities say they are treating the attack at the synagogue as a hate crime. They say the victims were all targeted simply because of their religion. They were Jewish. The alleged shooter, 46-year-old Robert Bowers, entered the Tree of Life synagogue Saturday morning armed with 3 handguns as well as an AR-15 style semi-automatic rifle. During the rampage, authorities say he fired all 4 weapons. The death toll, as you mentioned, stands at 11. Now, some people were able to escape unnoticed by the gunman. Barry Werber lived, but his friend, Melvin Wax, did not.
There was a pause in the shooting. Mel Wax pushed the door open, and I tried to stop him, but he pushed the door open. I hear some shots. He falls back into the room.
Thousands turned out last night for an interfaith vigil here in Pittsburgh, and among the speakers, the Tree of Life rabbi, Jeffrey Myers.
I helped pull out the people that I could from the front, but alas, I had 8 people in the back. 1 fortunately survived. 7 of my congregants were shot dead in my sanctuary. My holy place has been defiled. We will rebuild.
Underscoring that, Rabbi Myers says the synagogue is going to recover, and he urged people last night at the vigil to stop using what he called words of hate. At this hour, the alleged gunman, 46-year-old Robert Bowers, is in a federal courthouse here in Pittsburgh. His initial court appearance scheduled to get underway in a little less than an hour and a half from now. Back to you.
David Lee Miller, thank you. In the meantime, the gun debate is in full swing once again after that gunman killed 11 people in a Pittsburgh synagogue on Saturday using multiple weapons, including an AR-15 semi-automatic weapon. Some synagogues and churches have been increasing security, and President Trump on Saturday suggesting the Pittsburgh synagogue should have had an armed guard. Watch.
Nobody knows exactly what took place yet. It's too soon. But this is a case where if they had an armed guard inside, they might have been able to stop him immediately. So this would be a case for if there was an armed guard inside the temple, they would have been able to stop him. Maybe there would have been nobody killed except for him, frankly. So it's a very, very difficult situation.
Do you think that all churches and synagogues should have armed guards?
I hate to think of it that way. I will say that. I hate to think of it that way. So we'll see you with the police department.
Is that what you're suggesting?
No, it's certainly an option.
But New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio ripping the president's push for armed security at religious venues. Watch this.
We have to never allow the normalization of hate. That's not what we will stand for. And in that vein, we have to say What was said yesterday was also unacceptable. No, houses of worship do not have to have armed guards to be able to practice their religions. That's not America.
Josh, I'll go to you. I mean, you hear Mayor de Blasio say that, but as a New York citizen, I know when I walk around to synagogues in my area, they do have guards in front. So I don't know. Of course, you don't want to say they have to have them. Right. Where does this go?
Boy, you know, listening to the rabbi, the sadness in his voice,
yeah.
I mean, that's just hard to sort of process. I think where I come down on this, honestly, is each congregation should have the opportunity to defend itself how it sees fit, right? I think the idea that the government is mandating that we either have security guards armed inside or not, or, you know, in the case of Mayor de Blasio, banning weapons from being in a congregation. I think that's the wrong answer. I think the right answer is each congregation needs to do what they think is in the best interest of themselves.
Mm. We had Professor Alan Dershowitz on this weekend. He says he goes through a metal detector, sadly, when he goes to his temple. Yeah. So it's already happening, as you said. This weekend in Birmingham, Alabama, there was a McDonald's. A customer came in, saw a masked guard, shot and killed the guy. By the way, the customer was shot, and one of his sons that was with him was shot. The employee of McDonald's heard the shots, hid in the freezer. When it was all done and over, he said, this guy's a hero. And thank God he was here. God knows what could have happened. So I think it has to be up to the church or the synagogue or the temple to go, we want this. There are going to be churches, say in Texas, who go, we got a parishioner who's willing to stand at the door and is trained and can do it. But I think the federal government should step in if there are churches or synagogues who can't afford that kind of protection. Let's give it to them.
Interesting perspective. Kennedy?
I mean, so much of this boils down to personal responsibility and introspection. And, you know, and it is up to the individual. It is up to the individual congregation. And, you know, we look at these things and they feel like they're unthinkable, but they're really not, because so many of these synagogues really do consult with security experts, and they do, such as Tree of Life, they do consult and try and figure out the best way to handle an active shooter. You know, all of our public schools do the same thing, and you can be as prepared as possible, but sometimes it's just not enough. And one thing you have to realize is the government may not always be there to protect you, so it may be up to certain individuals, whether it's someone who is in charge of a synagogue or a church or a mosque. They decide how well armed they are, and you know, I agree with Josh. I don't think the federal government should be imposing rules and restrictions on places of worship, but we also have to look at ourselves and have a conversation. You know, what am I turning a blind eye to in my family and my community? How could someone like this be able to put out the kind of information that he was without people around him? You know, and even his neighbor said, it's not like he ran around screaming racial or anti-Semitic epithets, and if he had, perhaps they would have done something.
Well, we're going to talk about that a little later.
Maybe they would have known.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, we can't say that information wasn't out there, because it was. I would say this. Boy, this is tough. I mean, this is, how do you protect yourself from people in the community who want to do you harm for whatever reason? But this feels personal. As Americans, we were supposed to be a bastion where people who were persecuted and went through so much more outside this country were supposed to have a different level of safety. And we need to demand that for ourselves as well. So what happens on a Saturday at a temple or a shul is that, particularly in this case a synagogue, the door is left open oftentimes, like it was left unlocked with this one. You never want the community of worship to feel like it's not an open venue.
Of course.
But we are troubled in these times with security issues. And I think, as you all are saying, we have to take an individual look at each place. You know, there was in Kentucky, Jefferstown's Kentucky last week, another instance where a man targeted, we think, two people of color. We don't know. They haven't finished their investigation. But he had gone to a predominantly black church first. When he couldn't get there, he went to the Kroger and he shot and killed two black women. All of these incidents are very different. But we as Americans have to make sure that we're doing all that we can. And so if we want to offer help, as Rachel has suggested, that's such an interesting thing to do. You know, if you don't have the resources for it, maybe that's where government comes in. But where you have people congregating, for whatever reason in our society, we saw this with Gabby Giffords in Arizona. This isn't the first time we've learned this lesson. That people, crazy people, are going to go to places where we gather. Let's make sure that we're having those conversations. Clearly, that conversation about leaving a door unlocked is a tough one because it's a place of worship. I just want to put it all out there that this is personal to all of us. These are all of our people.
Homeland Security said, Kirstjen Nielsen said that they were in that church recently giving advice on security. Now, they didn't leave a guard there, but they did talk about
the one in Jefferstown.
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting. So prayer for all of it. I mean, last week was just, it was tough.
And we're going to talk more about the overall tone coming up in a little bit. We're not leaving that out of the discussion. But in the meantime, the Florida man suspected in a string of bomb threats targeting prominent Democrats set to appear before a judge for the first time. The disturbing signs of his past that are now coming to light. Plus, the debate over political discourse in times of national tragedy and the blame the president is getting for his tone. His response and whether the criticism is fair, we'll debate that.
Everyone has their own style. And frankly, people on both sides of the aisle use strong language about our political differences, but I just don't think you can connect it to threats or acts of violence, Vaughn. And I don't think the American people connect it.
Fox News alert, CNN says another suspicious package has been intercepted at an Atlanta post office there. You know, their headquarters are in Atlanta as well. It was addressed to the CNN Center in Atlanta and is reportedly similar to the others mailed to high-profile Democrats and President Trump critics. This comes as the suspect, Cesar Sayoc, accused of mailing those other 14 pipe bombs, is due in a South Florida court later today. He faces numerous federal charges that could result in him spending up to 48 years in prison. His targets included former President Obama, Hillary Clinton, former Attorney General Eric Holder, Senators Kamala Harris of California and Cory Booker of New Jersey, and California Congresswoman Maxine Waters. Steve Harrigan is live for us outside the U.S. District Court in Miami. Steve, a busy afternoon ahead.
Harris, it just keeps coming. A short time ago, the news broke that yet another suspicious package, this one addressed to the CNN Center in Atlanta, was intercepted at an Atlanta post office. CNN officials have stressed that there was no danger to CNN from the package due to the fact that all mail addressed to CNN has been screened off-site since last week. In the meantime, here, we're waiting about 2 hours from now, the first court appearance, the initial hearing of Cesar Sayoc, the 56-year-old man accused of sending 14 pipe bombs through the mail to prominent Democrats and critics of President Trump. It's likely to be a brief affair in court, probably just about 15 minutes. The judge will ask Sayoc about his attorney, and they'll also discuss the charges against him and possible extradition to New York. Those charges are serious, 5 federal counts, and they could put him away for up to 48 years in prison. They could also add additional charges, including one of the use of a weapon of mass destruction. That would mean life in prison for Sayoc. We're also getting a bit more of a picture of him in recent years from some estranged family members. His sister saying about Sayoc, we hope he gets the mental health that he needs so desperately, and that in recent years he's simply become weirder and weirder. In recent years, Sayoc, of course, has had a string of arrests, including for felony fraud and theft. He's gone through foreclosure on his house, declared bankruptcy, and for the past several years has actually lived in that notorious white van where now investigators think he may have used as a laboratory to construct those pipe bombs. Harris, back to you.
Steve Harrigan, thank you very much. President Trump is ripping the mainstream media as some outlets say his rhetoric is to blame for some of the recent violence. Take a look at this op-ed in the Washington Post asking, quote, how much responsibility does Trump bear for the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh? The president this morning tweeted this: there is great anger in our country caused in part by inaccurate and even fraudulent reporting of the news. The fake news media, the true enemy of the people, must stop the open and obvious hostility and report the news accurately and fairly. That will do much to put out the flame of anger and outrage, and we will then be able to bring all sides together in peace and harmony. Fake news must end, exclamation point. And counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, echoed these words, or his words rather, watch.
I can't believe on these shows yesterday and over the weekend, people are politicians pointing the finger, media making it about themselves. Cut it out. It's certainly a lesson to my 4 school-age children that there's evil in this world and that people were gunned down because of their faith, because of their Jewish faith. And a year and a half earlier, Steve Scalise almost lost his life crawling across the outfield in his own blood because that person was coming there to, quote, hunt Republicans. You've got to call it what it is. This president is asking us to rise above it and asking us to come together and unify as a nation. And anybody who's saying he isn't listening.
But former White House Communications Chief Anthony Scaramucci says that while he sees blame on both sides, he wishes his former boss would tone it down. Watch it.
I think there's problems on both sides, but I've also been, very clear on this. I've said it to the president and members of his staff, and I'll continue to say it. There's no need to have a war with the media. I would love to see the stuff dialed back on both sides, but good leadership requires that somebody go first, and I'd like it to be him.
Democrat Adam Schiff didn't mince words on where he lays the blame.
The president has a pivotal role there. No one sets the tone more than the president of the United States. And the tone that he sets is one of division, often one of hatred, sometimes one of incitement of violence against journalists. And there's no escaping our collective responsibility, but there's no escaping the tone that he sets for the country.
Ari Fleischer, who you may know, has served as White House press secretary under President George W. Bush, told the New York Times, quote, "It's misleading to compare Trump's behavior to his predecessors because he was elected to be different from his predecessors. Trump often sounds bad, but he acts well, while President Obama always knew what to say, but he didn't always do things well. He didn't do things right. He had soothing words and comforting, non-threatening language that didn't improve our standing anywhere, including domestically," end quote. Josh, first I want to just get your response to those words by Ari.
Yeah, look, I have trouble with this because on one hand, I do prefer a uniting force in times like this. I do think that we operate best when the country comes together in tragedy. On the other hand, I am just positively outraged. I think it is beneath contempt by some lawmakers and some in the media to suggest that President Trump is to blame for these horrific events that have happened over the last week. I can't even imagine how partisan somebody would have to be to wrap yourself in this circumstance and have the first thing that comes to mind, how do I take a partisan advantage here? How can I get President Trump to be somebody who's to blame for what I'm seeing? There is a lot of evil in this world. And frankly, I have a very difficult time figuring out how we confront it if the first thing we see is red and blue rather than how to come together and fix the problem.
So in reading this weekend, you did see those incendiary remarks by some with blame. You also saw on the flip side a conversation being had about the president holding a political rally and saying that he would have canceled it. He didn't want to, fold into, I'm paraphrasing him on that, to evil, but then making bad hair jokes. So you see the criticism coming there and the flip of what you're saying. Where do you put that?
Well, look, I think that his critics are going to find an area.
Do you think he should have held a political rally after this?
I actually think that one of the best things that George W. Bush did in the aftermath of 9/11 was tell the nation, this is not going to stop you. This is not going to set us back. We are going to live life like we are supposed to as Americans, and we are not going to let terrorism, anti-Semitism in this case, or anything else set us back. So I think the political, look, we're 2 weeks away from an election. Right. The hallmark of this country is to be able to express profound disagreements with each other without having to resort to violence. That's what separates us from everybody else.
It's also worth noting that blaming the other side isn't helping.
No.
I mean, if you stand there and you say President Trump started this and he has to stop, or you say the other side, or you point to who's been aggrieved, okay, so we've done that a bunch, and it hasn't improved anything. I was in church on Sunday, and our minister was saying, he was talking about this, and it struck me that we have had so many Sundays like this. It seems like every single Sunday there's something that we're talking about. Sometimes it was ISIS, a school shooting, whether it was a hate crime or something like this. And I thought to myself, what can I do personally?
Right.
I'm going to an interfaith service tonight after work to stand with people of other faiths and say, we are here for you. I'm so tired of the blame. It just isn't helping.
Well, I will say, Harrison and I had a great conversation before the show.
We had a show before the show.
Yeah, we had a show before the show. And I couldn't agree with you more. Listen, tolerance, love, religious tolerance, political tolerance, racial tolerance, all of that is taught at the dinner table. It's taught in your home. We all need to start there. And but I do want to go back to what Ari Fleischer said, because I think that's very interesting. First of all, on Fox News Sunday, it was incredible. Chris Wallace held up two headlines. One headline from Steve Scalise shooting and one headline with the pipe bombing. The headline for the pipe bombing said that the headline on the Washington Post was Trump supporter, you know, blah, blah, blah. The headline on the Washington Post, Steve Scalise, is Republican congressman shot. No reference to the fact that he was a Bernie Sanders volunteer, that he said he was going to hunt Republicans.
The suspect in that.
The suspect in that. So, and I don't think it's Bernie Sanders' fault, but this is why the president is out on his Twitter. This is why he holds political rallies, because he's not just fighting the Democrats, he's fighting the media who have aligned themselves with the Democrats to fight against them. And to be clear, we're 2 weeks out from election. He's not just fighting for his policies to win so that he can move his policies forward. He's fighting for his life. They've already said, we're going to impeach you. We want to
maybe not his life.
But
maybe
his political life, I should say. Yeah. But I just think the media has to look at themselves. We had Anthony Scaramucci come forward and say, yes, he should take a lead. Where are the people on the other side condemning the media and the Democrats for targeting Trump in this? So, I don't see it.
Kennedy, let me just ask you this question, because I thought Saturday night, and you mentioned that interfaith gathering that you're going to, Melissa. I thought Saturday night, and maybe the president could have done both, because he's got more energy than 20 of us. So maybe he does his rally, I don't know. But it would have been nice to see him from the venue that we all look to, and that's the Oval Office, at some point during the weekend, just to bring us all together. I don't know. Is that too Pollyanna-ish of me?
No, I think he actually does well when he has a message and he sticks to it. And he's been in office long enough to know when to use those rhetorical slings and arrows with precision, as opposed to some of the unforced errors that open him up for attack and distraction. And right now, everyone is going to use, unfortunately, as disgusting and as hurtful as it is, everyone is using everything they can for political advantage.
So true.
And sometimes you do have to set the tone, because if you're waiting for your opponents to do the right thing, you may be waiting forever. And there's crickets and loneliness on that prairie.
No, it's true. And I mean, you could see the president maybe in that fireside chat moment inside the Oval Office.
Yeah.
That's maybe stretching too many metaphors there, but just seeing him there and saying, "Look, we are in this political time, and there are two sides." I know you like this idea.
I love the idea. I think it's a great idea.
He could do that any time, by the way.
But whatever President Obama did, they loved. They even loved the crease on his pants. Whatever Donald Trump does, President Trump.
This is less about being loved and more about that right thing.
I just think he's damned if he does, damned if he don't. So I think he just is himself. I wish it could be like that, but. All right. I just don't know.
We'll move on. The migrant caravan continuing its trek through across Mexico now toward our border with Mexico. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is making moves to prevent it from crossing into the U.S. and the politics around the issue always heating up. We'll debate it next.
Do not come. You will not be allowed in. There is a right way to emigrate to the United States, and this is not it.
This is a Fox News alert. The U.S. military plans to deploy roughly 5,000 troops to the southwest U.S. border as early as tomorrow for support, not combat, in anticipation of the migrant caravan moving across Mexico toward the U.S. This comes a day after Defense Secretary James Mattis announced the military has begun delivering cement barriers to the border. Meantime, Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen with a stern warning to those migrants. Watch.
This caravan is not getting in. There's a legal way to enter this country. Those who choose to enter illegally will be stopped. We are working with our partners in Mexico. They have taken unprecedented efforts within their territory to ensure an orderly flow, and that those who have no legal right to be there are removed. We intend to do the same, but my general message to this caravan is do not come. You will not be allowed in. There is a right way to emigrate to the United States, and this is not it.
President Trump reportedly considering executive action to prevent people in the caravan from coming across the border. According to the New York Times, he's also considering a major speech tomorrow about a broad crackdown on the southern border. Former President Obama on Friday ripping the White House on the caravan issue. Watch.
Suddenly, it's this group of folks. We don't even know where they are. They're way down there. That's the biggest thing. And you know, as soon as the election's over, everybody will be like, what happened? We were being invaded. Where to go?
All right, this morning, President Trump tweeting, many gang members and some very bad people are mixed into the caravan heading to our southern border. Please go back. You will not be admitted into the United States unless you go through the legal process. This is an invasion of our country, and our military is waiting for you. So, Josh, it appears that the caravan is going to dissipate before it makes it to the southern U.S. border. So, in the meantime, with many miles to go, what can we expect from the UN in Mexico?
Well, I think the former president articulated his immigration policy perfectly there, and I think that's part of the reason why we find ourselves in the situation that we're in. The idea that this is all some kind of a fantasy is completely ridiculous. I think for the first time, perhaps maybe in American history, the idea of border security is not a bipartisan thing. I mean, I remember when I started working in the Senate, we had like 70, 75 votes for a border wall. Today, you're here with a straight partisan speech by a former president, essentially trying to get all of us to ignore the fact that there is a caravan of migrants headed for the border. Do you want border security or not? I think most Americans have decided that we are in a situation where we ought to protect our borders. We ought to have some sovereignty as a nation, and we ought to figure it out sooner rather than later. And it's given President Trump a heck of a cudgel to use against his critics.
It does resonate more with supporters of the president and, hardline immigration Republicans than it seems to with Democrats. But is it a winning issue?
Well, this weekend on Fox and Friends, I was hosting, and we had Griff Jenkins, who was reporting from the caravan. He pulled aside a guy, asked him on live TV, and the guy admitted that he had been deported for murder, and he was part of the caravan. So the idea that there are no bad people mixed in was just proven false this weekend. I don't know how many other people are in the caravan that have that kind of background, but we can't assume that there are no bad people. And I will say this, what President Obama did in that speech, and he did it in Milwaukee as well when he was campaigning, he's not just accusing the administration and President Trump of fear-mongering, but he's mocking people who care about the border, who care about their national sovereignty. That kind of mockery, that, clinging to your guns, clinging to your Bible, this goes right in line with the deplorables and all the other insults of people who care about this issue. This issue is important to Americans. And by the way, a lot of independents and some Democrats. And so I think that has to stop. And you're not a racist or a fearmonger or anything else because you care about border security.
I don't want to make this all about the former president, but he has inserted himself, so this is fair. Statistically, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I know you've looked at these numbers too, Josh, when you look at which presidents have mostly deported illegals from our country who've committed further crimes, he's like atop the list.
Oh, yeah.
Or very near the top. I mean, former President Obama was obviously doing one thing, and he may be saying something different on the stage right now about how we view people coming into this country. But just to give you an idea, too, then candidate Obama, then Senator, I should say, Obama, years ago, and you can look this up on YouTube yourself, it's on C-SPAN, said the opposite of what he's saying on stage about what we should be doing when people are illegally entering the country, particularly in larger numbers. Look for it and watch it. We've aired it on Overtime a couple of times. This is a political moment for this former president. I just wonder for his own base, political base, how genuine is he being? It's just a question.
Melissa?
Yeah, it used to be bipartisan.
When Kirstjen Nielsen said there's a right way to immigrate to this country, what is that? When you talk to people and you saw the interviews and people say, I'm a good person, I want to come here and work, we have open jobs. We aren't solving the problem properly.
No, you're absolutely right. And there is a systemic breakdown in which he says that there's actually not an easy solution or explanation for people who want to come here, good people who want to come here and work hard.
Legal immigrants are often the ones most opposed to this kind of disorder at the border.
Well, the recent mail bomb scare and the synagogue massacre shaking America. Next, how they could affect midterm voters as the top Republican and Democrat band together in a call for unity. See it here next.
We come in with this Fox News alert with just 8 days until Americans cast their votes in the midterm elections. Big questions on what impact the pipe bomb scare the Pittsburgh synagogue attack, and so much more we'll have at the ballot box. Lawmakers leading both the Democrat and Republican campaign efforts for the House, banding together to call for unity in the wake of recent violence. Ohio's Steve Stivers led the GOP's efforts. New Mexico's Ben Ray Lujan, the Democrats. Watch.
Democrats are not my enemy, they are my opponents. And while we have different visions for the future of America, different directions for America, we are all Americans first. We need to come together and do what's in the best interest of America.
Look, no one should be politicizing what happened this week. We should come together as a country. This should not be a political response, but rather a response in how we can further bring us together.
Josh?
No, look, I agree. I mean, what should unify us is the unity of purpose, a unity in understanding what makes America different and great, what makes us different than our enemies, and how we have had resolve over the years to try to get rid of the kind of bigotry and hate that we have seen pop up all too often here in recent weeks. What I'm not for is to try to paper it over, as some of President Trump's critics would like us to do, and pretend like we don't have differences, and that our opinions cannot be articulated, and that somehow if we just stop criticizing what we see as bad policy, that we'll all be together and we'll all think that we're heading in the right direction. That's not what this country is. That's not what makes us great. What makes us great is the ability to have these debates, full-throated, angry, at times passionate, but at the end of the day, we understand that we're all on the same team here. Yeah. And
right. When are you running? Exactly.
Well, it's interesting that you say I'm a Fox News, contributor, but I'm also part of a political family. So we've had this discussion in our own house. My husband's ads from this point forward have all been positive. In the last weeks of the campaign, there's a lot of pressure from consultants, and you know what this is like, to go negative. And what's been interesting is my kids have said, Dad, don't go negative. Don't go negative. They saw the ad that the consultants wanted to put through. And there's a debate in our house, because whether we like it or not, negative ads actually use them because they work. And so do people have the political courage enough to go positive, show what they're for, instead of demonizing their opponents and painting them as enemies? It's an interesting conversation. It's happening in every single congressional race right now, and it's happening at my own house.
So just so people know that you have enough people to debate, you and your husband have 8
we have
children.
8. So
Seven of them
right now
actually
talking about who's outnumbered.
Yeah,
my husband.
Your little one couldn't, but everybody else.
It's interesting that you say that. So one of my children goes to school with children of people who work at CNN, and so they sit there and they kind of go back and forth, and they may say things, and I always worry about what they hear at school. And I say to my kids and to my kids' friends when they bring them over, I say, look, it's like being the Mets and the Yankees, or or you're on rival football teams, whatever it is, on the field. You may get very heated, you may talk smack against the other team, but at the end of the day, everybody walks off the field as friends because we're all in it together.
We're all Americans.
I don't know if I try to. I'm not always sure that's true. I try to live that example for my kids, but that's how I try and explain it. We can only lead by example. You can't change other people's behavior.
I love the fact that Melissa says smack.
Yeah.
I would have picked Kennedy for that vernacular.
Mercy.
So, Kennedy, we're talking kumbaya, we're talking togetherness and being Americans. It's a necessity, and does it always have to be around tragedy?
Sadly, it's not. Tragedy isn't even bringing us together anymore. It used to be, unfortunately, a unifying factor. And we all remember how the country, and in places like New York City, how people came together after 9/11, and watching vigils in other parts of the world as they prayed for us and prayed for our country to heal. And it feels like we've really lost part in that. What I will say is, try becoming a member of a third party for a little while. And then you'll see what it feels like to lose every single election and to still walk around with a smile on your face.
My libertarian friend.
I mean, technically unaffiliated, but...
Right, there you go. She's always independent.
All right. Well, as we speed toward a two-party election still, sorry, Kennedy, some pivotal races in the heartland where Missouri Senator Claire McCaskill and Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker are facing tough re-election bids. Be sure to tune in tonight. Special report with Brett Baer. He is in Milwaukee, people, and he'll talk to both of those candidates, 6 p.m. Eastern, right here on the FNC for the Cool Kids. New questions about hate speech happening online. Social networks facing scrutiny for threats reportedly made by the Pittsburgh synagogue shooter, suspect, and attempted mail bomber. So where is the line between free speech and security? We'll talk about it. Stay close.
New fallout after Saturday's deadly synagogue attack in Pittsburgh. The social media network Gab, which suspect Robert Bowers reportedly used, appears to have been forced offline hours before the shooting. An account linked to Bowers taking aim at the Hebrew Immigrant and Society, a Jewish nonprofit group. A post reading HIAS likes to bring invaders in that kill our people. I can't sit by and watch my people get slaughtered. Screw your optics. I'm going in. Gab's founder says his site has a policy of removing threats, but that Bowers' posting was vague.
Do you see a direct threat in there? Because I don't. What would you expect us to do with a post like that? You want us to just censor anybody that says the phrase, I'm going in? Is that what you're proposing here?
Well, I think
that's absurd. And here's the thing. The answer to bad speech or hate speech, however you want to define that, is more speech. And it always will be.
In the meantime, Twitter is apologizing after the revelation that an account believed to belong to attempted mail bomber suspect Cesar Sayoc made threats against Democratic political strategist Rochelle Ritchie. She reported it to the social media giant, but was told the tweets did not violate Twitter's rules against abusive behavior. Twitter now posting a statement, quote, "We made a mistake. When Rochelle Ritchie first alerted us to the threat made against her, the tweet clearly violated our rules and should have been removed. We are deeply sorry for the error." Twitter also says it's investigating what happened and how to handle user concerns so that people can feel safe. Kenny, I'm going to start with you on this one because it's so hard to try and figure out how do you ascertain from speech when physical danger is potentially about to happen, and what do you do about that?
Well, it's interesting because they are trying to demonize this one more obscure social media platform, Gab, when it's clear that people who say hateful things and who threaten on a daily basis are still acting out on places like Facebook and Twitter, but it was this convenient groupthink, and they piled on Gab, and there you have the founder trying to, and this is a very difficult environment to do it, trying to defend free speech. And he says something that's absolutely right. We need more speech. You need to have more of a conversation, and having these arbitrary shutdowns or rules or algorithms don't get to the heart of what's going on. And that's the thing, is we're talking about politicization, and we're talking about the ways people act out and they fall over the edge of mental illness or whatever it is. We are not asking basic questions of how did they get there in the first place.
Yeah. I heard somebody from the FBI talking this morning about trying to put together algorithms where you compare, when certain words and phrases used together lead to violence. And do you think is there a math answer to this?
Look, there may be a science answer that I don't know about, but I think there's basically three things, right? The first is identifying credible threats. And I think that anything that we can do to identify a credible threat is a good thing. But I tend to agree with Kennedy, and I'm a bit of a First Amendment purist when it comes to free speech. More free speech is always the answer to hateful speech, because we can drown out hateful speech, hopefully, by getting together and speaking truth to power. But the third piece of this is we learned all the wrong lessons from 2016 election. We start investigating social media companies, and it's basically just because President Trump won the election that we're now all concerned about this. What we should be concerned about is what is the social media dynamic that is leading people to congregate in a way that produces hate, that allows people to foment this kind of anger. That is real, and it's something that we need to take a look at as a society, not just a government, but as a society.
Now, just very quickly, I want to add on to that, because there's a combination of the anonymity of social media and the switch that is flipped that allows people to act on violent impulses. And it's the combination of the two. And I think, sadly, that may be impossible to predict with an algorithm. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I want to get, if somebody somebody has a real threat online, I'd like action to be taken. But I'm nervous about these algorithms too. Remember, it was these algorithms that have been shutting down pro-life speech. A lot of pro-life speech has been shut down on Twitter and on Facebook. So there are very legitimate conservative. So when I see Gab getting attacked like that, and maybe they had a role to play, I don't know, but I want more platforms, because when we allow them to be centralized in just one or two, that's when I think you're going to see. And let's face it, these tech CEOs are liberals, and we're going to see that there's a lot of conservative speech that's going to be censored. And I think we need more platforms, not less.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, and we'll have more Outnumbered in just a moment as well. Josh Holmes, thank you so much. You have a final thought for us?
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I guess obviously we're in some troubling times here,
Yeah.
but I think if I have a final thought, it's just to urge everybody: don't disengage, don't become depressed. Now is the time to become more engaged in your communities.
Yeah.
Get out and vote. Make sure you do everything you can do to try to make the world a better place.
And Rachel, you have something very exciting to promote.
That's right. Fox Nation launches November 27th. It's the perfect complement to Fox News, so go to foxnation.com.
I have a feeling you're on there a lot.
I will be on there. You will be with me.
All right,
so.
it's going to be fun.
All right.
All right, and Kennedy, too. We are back here at noon Eastern tomorrow. Now, here's Harris.